We'll talk to Mohammed Shafiq, Chief Executive of the Ramadan Foundation, and Mark Lehain, former head teacher and director of the Campaign for Common Sense. Mark Lehain, your reaction? This is quite a bad situation we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's a really, really difficult situation, isn't it? I really feel for the pupils and the teachers and the community concerned. Because, I mean, if you think about it, hundreds and thousands of religious studies lessons and teachers will be going on every single day, and they're normally really, really good at handling these tricky, sensitive topics in ways that pupils can grapple with the issues without getting sidetracked or without making these slip-ups and people potentially finding stuff offensive. So the fact that this has made the news, I think we need to look at the silver lining. It shows us about what a great job teachers are doing day in, day out when covering these issues. And let's be clear, children do need to be taught about these issues and given different perspectives on them. The question is, in this context, and again, none of us sat here today really know exactly what went on in that lesson, but the context is key. Different people were saying different things about what went on in that lesson, and I don't think it's still clear now. That's why the school has to hold an independent investigation into what happened.
Do you think they're right to suspend this teacher? Because when you say the context isn't clear, there are no reports of him showing this image in order to hurt or offend the pupils. It seems to be him showing an example of blasphemy.
That's right. And actually what I am a bit worried about is normally, and I can say this as a former head teacher, suspension is meant to be a neutral act. It's meant to be a neutral act without prejudice. So I'm surprised that the schools have apologised before they've carried out the investigation, because it suggests they've already taken a decision about what the teacher did and whether they should have done it. But aside from all of that, we have to be clear that the threats and the protests that went on and that have been made are absolutely appalling. So we have to try and keep those two things separate. What goes on in a school, you're trying to balance things, but those protests and those insults and threats are totally out of order.
Mohammed Shafiq, what is your view on the protest? Because we've seen a situation in France where, very much like this, somebody showed a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad, a teacher, Samuel Paty, was then beheaded. So it was a terrible situation, and we don't, it must be very frightening for the teacher.
Absolutely. And let me just amplify what Mark said there. I mean, there are thousands of conversations going on in school classrooms across this country, including my daughter in high school, who had a lesson a while ago about blasphemy, and it was done in a respectful and tolerant way. And she told me about that lesson, and it was fine. So this is not about blasphemy. This is about showing an image which is offensive. It's an image which is used by those on the far right to demonize and attack Muslims and Islam, and it shouldn't have been shown. I think that's very clear. In terms of the protesters, if anybody is using violence or threatening violence against the teacher or anybody else, that's actually offensive, and it's something which I condemn strongly.
I hear you, but isn't by definition of having the protesters outside the school, that is clearly, and given the French example, a terrible story I mentioned, that is very intimidating for this teacher who, we wouldn't name him, he mustn't be named, but because his life, I mean, do you think his life is in danger because of this?
Well, I think what the school has to do now is due process, as Mark said, and then there needs to be a process of healing. It's not about outsiders coming in. It's about the parents, the teachers, the governors, all coming together and healing this relationship and moving forward. Muslims have been part of the fabric of Batley for decades. And, schools should be aware that characters of the Prophet Muhammad will cause deep offence and hurt to the Muslim community. And, I hope we all learn a lesson from that.
Mark Lehain, if we look at that awful French story, I suppose we could say that the signs are there that it is a very bad idea to show a picture or a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad to a classroom. It is just not a good... And how could it then happen?
Yeah, I mean, so like I said, that's why I think before any of us form a firm view about what should happen, we need to wait to find out exactly what did happen and how it was dealt with. And for me, I was chatting to some of my friends who are head teachers and teachers yesterday, because like I said, I used to be a head. I was trying to work out what would I do in that situation. And I think the most important thing for those of us that aren't involved in that is to keep calm and not pass too much comment on it and whip stuff up. And also, we mustn't let it get sucked into this broader issue about freedom of speech and the right to offend. Because let's be clear, we live in a free society. People absolutely have the right to hold offensive views and do offensive things. I mean, I can empathise with how my Muslim friends may be feeling. I'm an atheist now, but I grew up in a very traditional, very religious Catholic family. And so I understand how people feel when they have particular ideas or people that are precious to them attacked, but we live in a free society and absolutely people have the right to do that. It's a bit different in schools because children have to go to school. They are young and your job is to educate them, and you can't get on and educate kids properly if they're getting upset or distracted by other things like what's happened here. So you can teach about blasphemy, but ideally you're going to avoid showing material that people will find offensive. But let's wait for the head teacher in the school to do their investigation. I hope they can sort it out. I hope, unless things have gone horribly wrong, that the teacher can come back to that school and get on with their job. Because, listen, all of us, when we were teachers, would make mistakes. And all of us would hopefully, where we've made mistakes, be able to sort them out and then carry on.
Thank you very much, Mark Lehain, former head teacher, director of the Campaign for Common Sense, and Mohammed Shafiq, who's chief executive of the Ramadan Foundation, discussing the troubling bit of